Welcome everyone to the Teach Access Student Academy. This is Rolando Mendez. I am the Director of Education here at Teach Access, and I'm here to welcome you to our second day of the Academy presented by Microsoft. As always, we're committed to making this event as accessible as possible. You can turn on the captions using the CC button in the bottom of your screen or in your Zoom toolbar. There's also ASL interpretation available during the session. And if you need help, you can send us a message via the chat. Right now, the chat is open, but we will close it during the presentation to make sure you can focus on the content, but you can always reach out to any of the hosts and panelists through there. A little bit about Teach Access. We help educators teach accessibility and disability inclusion. We also support students to acquire accessibility skills. We do this by partnering with industry and other organizations to share real world practices with the goal to have everyone have some fundamental accessibility knowledge across the different disciplines. And a good reminder that all of our programs and resources, such as the one you're attending today, are free for educators and students. A little bit, an overview of today's schedule. Right now at 11 a.m., we have our welcome and feature panel. At 12:45 p.m. Eastern, we have Who Belongs in an AI World about AI representation. At 1:40 p.m., we have a showcase of students with their project on tactile coding blocks. At 2:15 p.m., we have Whitney Quesenberry presenting accessibility personas. At 3:15 p.m., we have two presentations on accessibility testing in the age of AI. And 4:15 p.m., we have a discussion about accessibility as a skill that future-proofs your tech career. And finally, at 5:15 p.m., we have a fireside chat with different professionals in the field to highlight that accessibility is everyone's job. Goals for the Academy. Throughout the Academy, you will be able to build skills to understand disability as a lived experience, to design with, not just for people with disabilities, to ask thoughtful questions about access and inclusion, and to connect accessibility to technology, policy, and ethics. There are various types of sessions that we have curated for you today. We have keynotes, which are longer talks that introduce big ideas and set the tone for the Academy. We have panels and chats, like the one we'll have coming up, that are conversations that bring together diverse perspectives and experiences. We have skill sessions to build specific accessibility skills, and we have showcases that highlight practical accessibility ideas and solutions. There are multiple ways for you to engage throughout the day. You can participate in the chat when it's available. You can ask questions using the Q&A feature of Zoom. You can take notes or don't take notes at all. And remember that quiet listening counts too as participation, and it's also a way to kind of let things sink in, and then you can always come back to any of the recordings and reach out to us. And also a quick reminder, we have a long day ahead of us, so step away, stretch, or take breaks as you need. Last but not least, we would like to thank to our project team, Liana Ferrante from Macmillan Learning, Ian O'Bara from Level Access, Ruth Mercado Cruz, University of Puerto Rico at Calle, Jennifer Potter from the University System of Maryland, Lexi Kuo from Michigan State University, and Sherry Song from Michigan State University. Both are fabulous interns at Teach Access. And to our sponsors, Microsoft, ADP, Google, Meta, Salesforce, and Scanner. And with that, I'll hand it over to our guest moderator today, Bill Schiffmiller from Acorio, founder of Acorio, that will present this fabulous panel on redesigning work, technology, and innovation through accessibility and disability inclusion.
Good morning from New York. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. And I want to begin by saying thank you to Teach Access for hosting and organizing this event and really bringing this eclectic group together that we have today for our panel discussion. where the theme is redesign work tech and innovation through accessibility and disability inclusion. That was a mouthful, but I want to kick off by saying that this is about how do we think about accessibility as a tool for innovation? And I think that would be a great way to kick this off. Again, I'm Bill Schiffner. I am the founder of Akoyo. I am a lifelong hearing aid user and a Forbes contributor focused on accessibility, auditory health, and workplace experiences for brands and leaders. Much of my work explores accessibility not as a requirement, but as a driver for innovation, better workplace, stronger human connection. And with that perspective, I'd like to welcome each of the panelists. And what I would like each of the panelists to be aware of, as we get involved in our engaging conversation, please mention your name when it's your turn to speak. So that way people can know, hey, who's this? Who's that? Who's speaking? So we want to be fully aware. So let me kick off with the introduction. And please correct me if I mispronounced your name. And so I'd like to begin with Alexander Strawning. Did I pronounce that correctly? Strawning?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, right, perfect. She is a strategic communications manager at Together International. And what I love about Together is the number two with Gether, Gether. Brilliant, love it. It is the largest startup accelerator created by and for disabled entrepreneurs. Alexandra brings both lived experiences and professional expertise to advancing entrepreneurship, mentorship, and access to capital that innovators historically overlook. And I love this, Alexandra, and I would love to invite you to add a few words from your perspective.
Sure, I would love to. I'm Alex Charnan. Alexandra is quite a mouthful, so go with Alex if you want. And I do bring lived experience, so not to be outdone by anybody here, but I have like 5 disabilities that I didn't know about until I started working with 2GI. And being able to bring my autistic traits and my ADHD traits and my lived experience as a 20-year diabetic, and then being a super neurodivergent with a TBI and dyslexia, into comms, which is something I've always loved to do, and be able to speak on behalf of our organization and our founders and our partners and really look into how to make our marketing more accessible and our story more accessible, has just been such an awesome experience the last year and a half. So very happy to be here.
Thank you. I feel like we have to be competing with our superpowers here.
I
So I
know.
love that.
I know every time I look at them, I'm like, this is too many.
So let's introduce Molly Lazarus. She is the U.S. Director of the Remarkable Accelerator, a global program supporting startups building product for people with disabilities. Molly's work focuses on helping founders translate meaningful solutions into scalable companies that deliver broader impact. And that is definitely most needed. I go to CES every year, and whenever I see Eureka Park and I see these wonderful ideas, my heart goes out to them and say, hey, I wish you success. So Molly, please, I'd love to learn more about what you and Remarkable do.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So we, as you said, support and fund companies building for people with disabilities, so specifically products that have an impact on disabled people. I know it's slightly different than TGI that invest in disabled founders. So the two of us together represent both sides, which I really appreciate. Yeah, we help try to make these incredible interventions sustainable so that the people who need it most can get them, and that these interventions are built through the perspectives of lived experience, but also enough business awareness that they do not die, a year after they are founded or 2 years after they are founded and in the hands of people. So that's kind of our focus, a little bit later stage and supporting startups.
Thank you, Molly. And because of the kinds of companies that you're helping lead to success, I'd like to introduce Blake Steineck. Did I get that correct, Blake?
It's Steinica, but it's a confusing last name, so no worries.
Steineck.
Yes.
Thank you for that. And the reason why I mention this transition is that Blake is a marketing and accessibility professional whose journey began following his vision loss in high school. Blake helps organizations build accessible products and connect with customers through marketing. And he shares his lived experience through his YouTube adapting site. And Blake, please, a few words about your work and you.
Absolutely. This is Blake speaking. Super excited to be here, especially through Teach Access. I just want to point out I'm only 5 years out since college, and my experience through college was super formative to growing a passion for technology, realizing it's not just my biggest enemy and frustration, but my best friend. And I think through working with startups and organizations like Fable, BIT, Inclusive, or IRA, I've learned a lot about the power of innovation with technology, the role that we can all play, and any young person or young leader out there to make an impact in this space. So, really excited to get to share more. And yeah, I also love sports and play blind hockey on the US blind hockey team. So, that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you, Blake. Bill here, and you mentioned Fable. What a remarkable company and the work that they're doing on how do we take the tools of making things accessible and make it profitable. And is really exciting, which leads me to Kelsey Hall. Kelsey is the Senior Director of User Experience and Head of Accessibility at ADP, where she leads efforts to embed accessibility across product design, development, and workplace experience on an enterprise scale. So, Kelsey, I'd love to get your take and learn more about you.
Thanks, Bill. I hope that my audio is coming through okay. I'll look around here. Okay, good. Getting some confirmations.
You sound kosher. You're good.
Thanks, Bill. First, I just want to say I'm super happy to join the rest of these folks on the panel. I think it will be really, really great. And thanks to everyone who's joining today. So I work for ADP right now, which is really a human capital management software organization. We pay a lot of people globally, but we also do a lot with time and talent and other things. And you also might see my cat coming in and out just for a little extra joy for you all there, so you can say hello. But yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this panel to talk disability accessibility. I myself have disabilities. I have several mental health disabilities, OCD, anxiety, and I also have a vision condition called central serous retinopathy. And I was raised by two parents with disabilities, which kind of, I think, set the stage for how I show up in these spaces. But aside from that, I'm really excited to hear what my fellow panelists have to say and to share today with all of you.
Awesome. Bill here. Thank you so much, Kelsey. I've been in this accessibility space professionally, 15 years now, and I've seen an amazing transition. And I would love to learn from each of you. Where have we been? Where are we now? And where are we heading? And I'd like to start off with you, Blake, if you can.
Sure. I think what jumps out to that question is we are at such an exciting time for this. I think to my own experience in 10 years of vision loss, and I remember first learning JAWS and the screen reader, and there were certain applications for school that I needed to use it for. Those common tools that we would all know were not screen reader friendly like at all. And these days, there's tremendous improvement for them. And the tools that I've used since then has evolved so much. And I think it's cool to go from a time of a pre-digital, borderline pre-digital era to now this new world with AI that I have seen early adoption for people in the blind community and a huge low-hanging fruit impact for accessibility to make it better. But also in terms of where we're going, there's opportunities to continue to improve accessibility, but also opportunities at the same time to leave it behind. And I think through greater awareness, we can make sure that it's keeping up with the pace of technology, which is kind of this double-edged sword.
I can definitely speak to my own frustration in the general computer use, and I cannot imagine that people with other accessibility needs, what they're going through, and begin to fathom how do you approach uh, the the technical challenges that they're having on the screen. And Kelsey, I wonder if that is something that you're faced with on a daily basis with your team as you're keeping up with all the platforms and services that you provide.
Yeah, as you're asking the question, I was really thinking about enterprises operationalization. Is that a word? Hold on. You know what I mean.
Works for me.
Operationalizing. There we go. That's the word. Um, and the complexity that comes with that. ADP has hundreds of products and lots of services. And I think it's always a challenge when you're thinking about the complexity and dealing with really old legacy technology and then much newer technology and trying to find the transition or the convergence and what comes of that. So I think one thing I've really appreciated I've been in this space, which is wild, almost about 19 years now. And I've noticed a lot more recently transparency, or I guess clarity around the back end of accessibility and what it takes in, especially when you're dealing with massive organizations that have a lot of old tech, if they've been around for a long time. And I think that's both provided clarity to everyone, but also opened up doors and opportunities to start thinking about tech differently. And I think, of course, with AI and everything coming in, there's a lot of opportunity to speed up things like moving from old technology to newer technology, which has great benefit for the disability community. And so, yeah, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to integrating just across so many different teams with lots of gaps in knowledge or different expertise. But I think we have had a lot of growth. A lot of the same issues still persist, which is where I think we can find in the future some really awesome opportunities for automation, for AI, for incorporating users. You mentioned Fable, and other organizations like Fable that do a lot of research. I think we desperately need more and more insights and learning and research right now to better inform things like AI or automation and the use of that. So what's coming is really, really exciting. It's a little bit, I don't know what the future holds, but I think as long as humans are using technology, there's opportunity. So we've definitely had some significant change in the last 5 to 10 years in particular.
Absolutely. Bill here. Alexandra, with what Kelsey just described, the opportunities are there. It's exciting, but it seems like it's getting more and more complex with the rise of AI and all these digital tools and the competitive spaces that we're in. What is the trend? What's the theme that you're seeing within, the accelerators and the entrepreneurs that come to the program? What's the theme? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so this is Alex. We just did an AI accelerator last fall, and a lot of it was on creating AI tools for like teaching students with dyslexia, and the AI tool would make songs out of it because they did research that creating songs actually helped students about a subject would help the student learn the subject better. So you would plug certain things into the AI and it would come up with a song for you to learn the topic. We had another individual who actually won our pitch competition. She had created an AI app that would help neurodivergent people like just organize our lives better, but also integrate with, your family calendar and this calendar and just also have an AI component that you could talk to and it would help remind you about doctor's appointments or hey, this you're going into ADHD burnout and stuff like that. So there everybody seems to be using AI. Internally, we're a very small team. There's only six of us,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
our skills gaps are very different. Like I am a tech person and I want to be playing with the newest tech and I'll figure it out. But, we just had an instance where we were using a very well-established CRM company and none of us could get the CRM off the ground, like to actually use it because we didn't understand it. And I was like, if it's not useful just because it's established doesn't mean it's helpful. I would rather, use a Google Sheet and then plug it into Claude and have Claude categorize it, tell me if I've doubled people, and then be done. So I think when you start to use AI and it gets more complicated, there still has to be like a human capability component. And it's not necessarily always like the bigger, the better, the best. It still has to be accessible for our different skills and brain learning styles.
Well, thank you, Alec. Just the realm of accessibility, I always like to look at accessibility at the capital A. There's so much to choose.
Yeah.
And, Molly, with what Alec just described, from your point of view, in the name of an entrepreneur who's passionate about something, wants to build it, you may see that's great, love your heart, business hack goes on, it may be a one-trick pony, it's a very short-sighted, or are you starting to see entrepreneurs who are beginning to look beyond that?
Yeah, so Molly speaking. A couple of thoughts just on AI, and I want to loop it back into the question that you asked, Phil. So,
And by the way, Molly and everyone else, please add, put in your 2 cents as
amazing.
we're talking. Well, look, we got our coffee, we got our water. Come on in, let's get coffee and talk.
Amazing. Thank goodness for coffee. So I think AI is in an interesting place conceptually, right? I think a lot of us with disabilities and just generally found the first iteration of the internet to be inaccessible, right? And so there's an interesting opportunity that we're moving into, which is we are at the precipice of a new technology, a new world. I have a 1-year-old son. The world that he will live in 15 years is so out of the realm of understanding of the world that we grew up in, or even right now. Things are changing very quickly. And I think with AI comes an increasing general expectation for personalization. I think previously personalization was thought of as like, if you get an accommodation, you get something special, which we know is wrong, but is kind of the sometimes the way the workplace can interact with the expectation of accommodations. But with Claude and all of our chatbots being able to literally build things in the way that works best for our brains, for our minds, for the way that we need to hear information or see information or things like that, we're really getting a higher expectation generally for personalization. And so, how does that trickle out into uh, tools, right? I think there's a general question of can we build AI with deeper embedded accessibility this time around instead of last time where we just put, fixes on top of it? Can we think more critically? I'm not sure that we have enough people in the room asking those
Hmm.
questions at
Right.
those companies that are developing the model. Spoke at a conference with an AI researcher recently, and she was saying like the teams don't even understand their own models. The models are like beyond what they understand. And so if you're not understanding what's under that box, like certainly there needs to be more checks and balances to make sure that we're not making the same mistakes that we did previously. Um, on the like what tools will sustain question, I think it's a really tricky point because as we know, there were companies that applied to our accelerator like 2 years ago who you can just use their tools. You can build it yourself now, right? Like you can make your own version and what needs to exist and what needs to sustain actually is changing significantly. And so I find sometimes to be in a conflicted place, which is like, do we make an investment in this company when I think that, Google will build this in 1 year and then this company won't be sustainable? And so I think business needs to adjust, and we're really looking at how do we deepen investment and support into the companies that we see as distinctly assistive technology, distinctly something that will, help a large population of people in a meaningful way for a long time versus a tool that you can build quickly and might work for you, but probably will exist in the market, in 5 years from a bigger company who will sadly put you out of business.
Yeah, also doing nonprofit work in addition to for-profit. I'm always making the distinction between markets and community. And Blake, I'd love to get your take on what Alec and Molly had just said. Like, with your marketing hat on, how are you thinking about these things? Because we know marketing takes time. We can't get instant results return, but I'd love to get your thought on what you're seeing could be a successful model for marketing in this space.
This is Blake. Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of challenges as well as on the flip side, huge opportunities for marketing. And when we speak to these new technologies, innovations with AI, it can create a lot of confusion for customers and for businesses, especially in accessibility. For example, if we look at um, for people with disabilities as the customer looking for a new tech tool that could help in their life or some new service, there's always more and more companies or products out there that people are trying to bring to market. But as the customer with a disability, it can be really confusing to know what's what, how does this fit in with the technology that I use, why would I use this, or let alone how do you even find that out there? And so then for companies, I think it's a big marketing challenge of how are you actually connecting with people with disabilities. And on one end, people with disabilities need to learn their technology and tools, but it's another for your product to be accessible with those tools, to fit in with those tools. Maybe it's redundant and not even useful, or maybe there is something another tool that already works for it. And then quickly on like the B2B side, if you are looking for a web or mobile accessibility service to use, there's so many companies out there that are communicating similar things. And if you don't know about accessibility, it can be confusing. You may go with the wrong provider, not understand that there's automated tools, there's manual testing, there's human usability testing, whatever the selection may be. Companies need a better position and message themselves to better connect with businesses that need the service to properly like carry out improving accessibility. So a lot of angles and thoughts that brings up, but hopefully that was succinct enough.
Well, this is something I'd like to ask you, Kelsey, and just a little quick side comment. We're talking a lot about digital accessibility solutions. Let's not forget some of the physical accessibility services and needs that need to be considered. So I'd like our viewers to take that into account, that accessibility is not all about digital solution, but what's great about digital solution is it's right out of the box. It's right here, ready to go. and you have lots of choices than ever before. Kelsey, because of the work you and your team are doing at ADP, and you always have to be relevant on top of these things, how do you determine what stays, what goes? I've been in situations where looping system for those with hearing aids. Looping system is, to me, an antiquated system. It's not practical. Not all hearing aids use looping system, and most hearing aid users don't know about it. While there's some great newer technology coming along, like Orcast from Bluetooth, which I love and embrace, but there's always that question of what do we keep? What do we don't keep? How do we go forward? We don't want to leave anyone behind. Love to get your thoughts on that, Kelsey.
That's a really good question because people are so dynamic that it largely depends. But before I even dive into that, I do want to kind of go back to what Molly and Blake were talking about, related to like just thinking about marketing or just how companies are integrating into this space. I feel like the fear of AI in some ways, or like the concern is like, oh, everybody's going to start sounding the same. So I think, and I feel that we've, as a community, in the disability community, the accessibility community, have been talking a lot about how accessibility is a differentiator. But I really think in this world, it really is going to be a critical differentiator when everything starts to sound the same or look the same or feel the same. There will be some glaring obvious points when it doesn't. And I think finding like, new companies that are trying to get off the ground, or the redundancy conversation, it made me just think about how, in a lot of ways, I think we'll eventually see some organizations go back to basics. And this kind of dovetails into your conversation or your question about how do you determine what comes and goes. I think people kind of tell you that, right? Like, that's where research becomes so critical. It's where user insights become so critical. What are people using when it comes to the disability community? Really understanding how are they using technology? How are they learning about technology? To your point, I think there's a lot of things that are built into our mobile devices that many disabled people don't know exist. And so and it is always the conversation in a tech company, you don't want your product to be so heavy because you're not deprecating anything, you're just keeping all the things. But at the same time, I think that's where data and insights become really important. Are people not using a certain feature because something else is taking the place of that? And if so, what is it? And we want to know, right? Are they not using it because it's not solving a problem that they have? I think those are the back to basics that are going to start to differentiate companies, help companies determine what to keep, what to let go of. For new companies starting up, really, I think it's the kind of age-old question of what problem are we trying to solve? Because you can stand up a new company for something, but if you don't understand how to listen to your users, if you don't understand your users, if you don't have your own kind of perspective or voice, and you don't know how to reach the community, it's really not going to help. So I think that's where we're going to start to see some differentiation pretty significantly. And I feel like we constantly oscillate back and forth in this world around fail fast, move fast, and then the opposite of it being like, okay, like let's pull back, let's listen to our users. And I've not really found a downfall in really looking at the data and listening to the users. And so hopefully we'll find that back to basics in all of this as things accelerate. I think there's some things we can learn that are tried and true, that don't require us to build something just to build it, or to create something just to create it, or create a company just to create it. I think it's there's so much more that comes with that. And the last thing I'll say is, even in a large company, right, like, or any large mid-sized company with AI, I think there's a lot of thoughts of like, well, if anyone can just build it, then companies will just start to build their own things internally. But I think the short-sighted nature of that is there's a lot of overhead that comes with building something, not just like physical overhead, but also like someone has to maintain it. Someone has to fix things that go wrong as the technology shifts. Someone has to add new features and functionality. Someone has to keep things up to date. So it's like there's a lot of cost that goes into just building something if you actually want it to be functional or usable. So that's another piece to this too.
I love that, and the cost of things is so critical, and it's always about a return on investment. And I think it's also a question of, well, how do we rethink or reframe what a return on investment is? Is it monetary? Is it value? And Alexandra, has that taken into account with the individuals and the startup that you're working with, how they think about those kinds of things? You know, how do you take that great idea and think beyond that? Have you considered the cost, what it involves?
Yeah. So this is Alex. I think that they do. I don't work directly with them. I'm more in the background, but because we're so small, we all work together, right? The ones that I have come to be close to do. And just like building off what Kelsey was saying, I think another cost that we don't really think about much with AI is just the environmental cost. Like, how are we reshaping our ecological world with these massive factories and data centers and maintaining them with local water supply and stuff? And how's that affecting us in the long run? And if we don't need all these things, because a lot of the common conversations now are, why is AI in everything? Like, I don't need this to have AI. And like my doctor doesn't need to use AI in the doctor's office, but she does. And she does ask permission first. But I have to be like, why? You have a computer, you got to take notes anyway. It's unethical to not do it live. And so I think it's interesting, and hopefully they are thinking of the wider impact as they're creating things. But I think that because it's so easy now to create things, that's probably not on a lot of founders' minds. It's like, what can I do to make this tool that I think could be helpful or make me a ton of money, and then move on.
Well, on the tech side, working with developers, what key to making that MVP successful, that component? What is needed from the coder inventor side in order to, I guess what I'm getting at is we don't know what we don't know, and we get so caught up in AI, but as you mentioned, was it you, Kelsey, about getting back to the basics? I feel that we need to get back to the basic and understand what accessibility is, why we need these kinds of features in order for us to build as we go forward. I find that we get so caught up in AI that we forget why they're there. Let's
Why
get
is
your
it
thoughts. Yeah. And please, Molly, Blake, chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. I had a startup come through that was like, we've said we did AI in our application because everyone has to have AI now. And I was like, no, no, you don't. It's all good. It's actually totally fine if you don't have AI. I think kind of going to your question, Belle, to Alex earlier, is there are a lot of people solving problems that are their own problems. And I think that that is a super powerful starting place for a company. I've built a company based on my own problem. The problem comes is your problem, like I have ADHD. My problem is so deeply clear in some areas to myself. But when I bump up against, a friend of mine who also is neurodivergent and has autism, they want something totally different, right? And then there there's so many different perspectives in building a product. And so when we evaluate applications for Remarkable, we look across a variety of dynamics. We make sure that every company is evaluated by multiple people with lived experience of the disability that they are attempting to build for. And we also make sure that there are enough people who have business acumen in that space to know if these could be sustainable. There are many opportunities for people to build individualized assistive technology. There's the TOM program, TOM, which is a college program where you can say, this is my problem, and college students will essentially build you an assistive device that works just for you. And then they open source those options. You can go in and learn from them. There are lots of things that can help on an individual level. One of the things that I worry about is there's so much company creation, but there's so little company sustainability. And so, how do we think about, does this need to be a tool, or can I bring my expertise to an existing tool, or can I, become a feedback mechanism for bigger things? Like, how do we make sure that we are actually not just reinventing the wheel over and over and over and over? Like, I know 15 ASL translators, and I'm not even 100% sure the community wants a virtual ASL translator, right? Like, there's a million things that are doing the same thing, and they're sucking up little bits of capital that could be going towards like one or two winners. And that's kind of my concern, and why we have decided to like bring in companies a little bit later stage than creation, because you really need to do the research at creation to make sure there's not a million other companies that do what you do, but just slightly differently. There's not like an existing feature in Apple you just didn't know about. Like, there's a lot of things that I think people forget to do before they go and solve problem and call it a business.
So, Blake, what Molly just said, Bill here, I have to remind myself. We look at companies like Ira, Stable, Fiverr. What is that secret sauce that they have that they're able to run with and start to see success, as Molly is suggesting? What are you seeing that is that common secret sauce amongst those companies and others that you've seen?
This is Blake. I loved a lot of the points you shared, Molly, and I chuckle knowing the reality of that as a user and seeing those challenges happen. But I think when you say MVP, my thought is people don't truly embrace a true minimum viable product. And if we want to say a secret sauce or something, I would say is making your minimum viable product even more minimal than you would expect. If you are creating a new app or a new website, it may not even be launching some beta version in an app store. It could even start as early as discussing the concept to remove your biases and embrace uh, a diverse perspectives from different types of users, and looking at ways that you can rapid prototype. For example, with mobile apps, it's hard to rapidly test changes if you are working with screen reader users, because with Figma historically there wasn't screen reader support, and you can't keep launching new builds to the App Store, as that just takes time for review. But as Figma has started to release more and more screen reader support, you can create a mobile design and go through that with a desktop screen reader with a true, more minimum viable app. Yes, there's limitations of the screen reader experience on a desktop is different from a phone, but we have to try to test these innovative ways to get true rapid feedback loops that create good products from the start and remove biases. So those are some examples I've seen that really sets apart making innovative, accessible technology.
Kelsey, with that being said, what keeps you up at night? I mean, there's so much of this to consider. I mean, really.
Oh God.
As an entrepreneur, a lot can keep me up at night, and we don't want to be too hasty, but we need to be nimble. We need to be agile. We need to be going forward, but we also need to make some decisions. So how do you take what is on your mind and just put it in perspective and make it a priority, if you will?
I'm gonna go a little bit rogue here because I think, to be honest, AI doesn't keep me up at night in terms of day-to-day stuff, right? And like innovation doesn't keep me up at night. Accessibility stuff, all of this doesn't keep me up at night in terms of the work to be done. What keeps me up at night is thinking about, and this is also why I love Teach Access so much. I am very concerned about, I think, the mental health of the professionals who are coming through the pipeline to do this work in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm concerned about mental health, but I'm also concerned about like the confidence of people, like that they can do this work and do this work well. I'm very fixated right now on trying to build skills or support people trying to enter this space. And I'm really hopeful that our accessibility professionals can rally around the kind of next generation of talent coming through, because that I think is more so what keeps me up at night. The ensuring we have people who feel fully supported, fully like they have the right resources and tools and confidence to do this work as like the current generation of folks are kind of, moving into their later years of this work or into communities. I've seen a lot of people who have been doing this work for a really long time starting to transition more into local community work, which is awesome too. But I'm very concerned to ensure we have a full pipeline of folks who are ready to rock and confident and supported to do the work. That's honestly what keeps me up at night right now.
I asked that question to everyone in the group. What keeps you guys up at night? But also think about what are some of the hard and soft skills that we're going to need for these professionals as we go forward. I leave it open to anyone who may want to answer. Or if you want me to, I'll put you on the spot. Molly, if you will. You knew I was going to go.
I was just putting a link in the chat. I was like, ooh, I hope he doesn't call at me. So what do I hope for these folks that are listening? Is that the question?
Oh, well, what to echo along what keeps her up at night, and that is about finding the professionals going in the way I understand it, where they are mentally healthy and stay sane and be able to stay on top of it for the increasingly challenging and demanding role ahead.
Yeah, I think Kate, you summed it up. Sorry, Kelsey, you summed it up really nicely, and that it is kind of a changing of the guard in some ways. There's like a lot of people have been doing this work in a world that was slightly different. And so I think that emerging leaders and the folks that are hopefully on this call in accessibility really have an opportunity to lead in this way, in a way that is different. I think that it can feel intimidating to be kind of on the precipice of a potentially different future, and the navigation to deal with older systems, people have been doing it for a long time, things like that is a skill. Like that is a real skill to be able to navigate new technology, old technology, new perspectives, older perspectives, and to hold them all in the same weight and to move forward with that. And so I would just say that, like, as the accessibility skills, the things you're learning through Teach Access are really, really important, but also being able to learn how to work with other people, how to work with many different people will be a crucial skill to continue and to really make an impact in this space.
Alexandra, I want to ask you if you find that working together, working in teams, there's the need to be in person with colleagues or remote work, working as well as the schools to be a combination. I know that I get more joy when I'm with people in and around the water cooler at the office and knocking on someone's door and say, "Hey, Joe, you got a second? I want to run something by you." I'd like to learn that. What is that kind of employee colleague dynamic looking like that you think works so well?
So it's this is Alex, and what's funny is we're all remote and we are all over the planet. I mean, we have one person in LATAM and one person in Canada, and then the rest of us are sprinkled along the eastern coast. Um, we do really well collaboratively. Um, it is a little different than working, together and sitting. We get a lot done when we do in-person meetings once a year. Almost too much where you're like, slow down. But we really, I mean, the people that I work the closest with will do like working sessions together where we'll sit and you don't even have to talk. You can just, be what's it called? It's not mirroring, but there's another term for it where you're working body doubling, that's the word. And it just helps you get into the flow of working. I'd say that remote work can be super lonely. Um, However, I also have a furry companion on the floor, so I do like working alone. And I do think that the people who do the best in our accelerators and in our incubators have really solid teams that they can one of them is coming to the sessions and the other one is working on whatever they learned in the background and um they end up doing really well in like the pitch competitions and then go leaving our community, not leaving our community but leaving the programs and continuing. So I think it just depends on your personality. Like as an autistic person, I want to be alone and I want to be in my house. I want to be able to get up and go to the bathroom and snack and whatever I need, play with my fidget toy.
Well, I love that perspective because it's all about collaboration. What can we do to innovate together and come to an agreement? This is how we're going to work together. And um, one of the questions that Teach asked was accessibility is often described as everyone's responsibility. I agree. But where do we start? And look, and many organizations have their own set of challenges in just understanding the mission and vision of an organization or even its values. So, Blake, if you could help put this in perspective, with your marketing hat on, everyone's responsibility when it comes to accessibility, well, where would you start?
Yeah, this is Blake. If I could adjust the slogan in a way that makes more sense to me,
Please do.
I would say that can be accessibility can be part of everyone's role. I may need to think more on how I'd better adjust it, but basically, it can sound daunting or I honestly feel a little pressure when I hear accessibility is everyone's responsibility. You got to figure it all out. Like, why aren't you doing this? And that's not what's being said. That's just what I hear. And where my mind goes into analysis paralysis of, what do I even do? This can be so insurmountable. Kind of going back to what Kelsey said. But I think it's looking at what is your small piece of the pie and your role that you play, whether you're a college student and you can sign up to be a note taker to support a student with a disability in the class, whether you work in social media marketing and you make the content you put out accessible, whether you work in HR and are reaching out and supporting people with disabilities. I think there's all these roles that totally play a small piece of the pie, even if you don't touch code, which historically and probably currently many people may think you have to be technical to be in accessibility, but it's deeply human. So just start with where are people with disabilities around me that I can play a role in making impact. And with the work I put out, how can I just make this a little bit more accessible, start learning new things. Even the technical sides are becoming so much easier to learn with the tools we have out there, things being easier to figure out with AI. So those are a couple thoughts to that sentiment.
Like if I could kind of jump in there. So I think I've worked in camps for people with disabilities my entire life. We have people with all different disabilities in our accelerator, and I've kind of developed my own sense of scanning. I scan rooms, I scan web, like I look and I think, like who wouldn't have access here? Just you could walk down the street any day and say, oh, there's a lip on that building, or like, oh, like interesting, they didn't shovel the snow there. We just got 3 feet of snow. So that's like, like there's a lot of ways that I think you can start to build the muscle in yourself to start creating awareness around accessibility. And some of that is you need to meet somebody with this disability and that disability, or have conversations. You need to talk to people. You need to ask really awkward questions like, hey, how do I make this more accessible for you? Or do you need help here? Or what would be a weird way to what would be a not weird way to ask, how I can support you? Or like, ooh, we screwed it up. We thought that Airbnb said it was accessible online, but now we realize like the shower is not. So like, what are the options that we can come up with together? And I think when accessibility feels scary, like if you get it wrong, you are bad, then people
Mm.
are going to push it as far away as possible. But if accessibility feels like a pathway to being curious, a pathway to getting to like work together with more people and to be more creative, I think you start to just be like, ooh, I screwed that one up, but like, let's do it better next time. And like, that's okay, right? It's better than avoiding the topic altogether. But I think growing that muscle of being like, if I were deaf, like, where would this not work for me? Like, if I were blind, if I had a walker or a cane, or, what would not work for me? I think building that muscle in yourself can happen all day, anywhere, and it will help you feel more confident when the time comes.
Yeah, Molly, I've been taught to learn to make better mistakes. So nothing is ever perfect. And, I love the scanning of the room. What if? We should all be in the position of questioning things. And we may not have the answer to it, but always be asking questions, because we talked about collaboration earlier, by asking the question, I don't know. Well, why don't we explore that together? And for me, I've always been fascinated by, look, the roles and responsibilities that you have, you do so well. Let's bring the accessibility piece into the equation here. And let's ideate and innovate. You never know what it's going to unlock. And Kelsey, I imagine you experienced that kind of approach in your organization, in the line of work that you do.
This is an interesting one to me, just this whole topic, because I think Blake was talking a little bit about like, how might we reword that question? And I
Mm.
kind of agree in that, because it sounds daunting, yes, but also because lately I think I'm really in this AI space right now, but because of AI, we've created this overconfidence now in being able to execute on things. And so I think there's both sides to this coin. It is everyone's responsibility in that it's really important that accessibility practices are embedded in the work that everyone is doing to ensure we can make as many inclusive experiences as possible. And people do have a due diligence to understand that and learn that and constantly ask themselves, what am I missing? And at the same time, I don't want to give false confidence to people who are learning accessibility to believe that they understand it all. I've been doing this work for 20 years and I absolutely do not understand it all. I never will understand
Mm-hmm.
it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's almost sometimes worse if you're entering the space with a little bit of knowledge, in that sometimes, because it's just a certain purview that you have, you don't see the larger picture, so you don't even consider you're missing something. And so I don't know also, Blake, the best way to ask this question, but I would love to also think about it because it is everyone's responsibility, but it's almost like we also don't want to try to, with little knowledge in one space, solve other people's problems without enough insight, whether it's because it's our job or whether or not we're trying to solve someone else's issues based on the disability they have that we don't understand. All of those things, it's like how, and I think it gets back to that idea of you have to ask the question, what am I missing? And who might know more than me? And how can I bring them into the conversation? So I'm not articulating this very well. I actually just wrote a post about this because I've been thinking about it a lot.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat and people can let me know what they think. But I really do, I it's a both and. I both believe it is everyone's job. And in some ways, when people are like, how can I get into the accessibility world? I'm a UX designer or I'm in marketing or, I'm in accounting or whatever. Sometimes I just want to be like, you are in it. You just don't know yet because we need accountants who understand accessibility. We need marketers who understand accessibility. And you're almost in some ways more powerful in the role you're in and learning it in and out. So I have a lot of those questions too. It's like, you don't have to just become this when you're already something so important. But if you bake that in, it's better. So, like in that realm, yes, steadfastly all for this. I just feel and have seen lately this new pattern emerging of it moving into this under aware, overconfident space that is giving me a lot of pause. So, anyway, that's my thoughts.
You
Molly,
unmute,
I think
Molly.
yeah. Yep.
The power piece, I think, is so, so important. We had a company that was selling this incredible accommodation tool. They brought it, I'm not going to say what big company, they brought it to this big company. The company dragged it on for a year. And then they said, hey, our accessibility department actually can't buy anything. So bring it to sales. And then they had to move and find a champion in sales. And it actually became a totally different tool that just happened to be accessible. And now they're selling it all over the place, right? But without finding a champion not on the accessibility team, they would not have been able to sell their product. And so I actually think there's so much power in knowing accessibility and being an accountant or being in sales or being in marketing, right? I think we forget that there's so much more power sometimes in that.
Oh, I totally love that piece. And, you could have somebody, hey, I know a lot about culture and the arts, and how did that apply to the line of work we're doing here? And one of the things I love to discover with clients and other organizations is what accessibility can help unlock. You have a gold mine sitting there. You just don't realize it that accessibility help you guide into what the potential is. One of the things that I love is Amazon Fire. It was Amazon's first smartphone, and it was a disaster. It was a failed product. But what came out of it? Alexa. And Alexa was as we all know, the voice activated service. But look at the power of a piece that came out of that. And I think what may it be a feature, may it be an overall product, a service, or even a skill set within an organization, accessibility can help unlock what your potential is. Have you guys experienced that in your line of work? Yes. Okay. How do we instill that into our daily practices? How do we get, Kelsey, you mentioned your CEO has a mission. My former CEO, my former boss, my work at Apple, Tim Cook, talked about accessibility is not an IOI. It's about embracing our differences. And to me, that's awesome. That is a great driver. That is a message to an organization to say, hey, we need to be thinking about accessibility in a different way. I guess my question is, how do you instill that? How do you drop it into these organizations? Where do you start?
And
How do we get the students of Teach Access to stop thinking that way wherever they go to work?
I'm happy to jump in to start, but I would love to hear what others have to say. I think, how do you get the students of Teach Access? I think ask, what am I missing? Wherever you go, what am I missing through this lens? But I also, I'm gonna be the both and person right now, I think, just because um, I don't think you can ever force culture or cultural change, but I think you can set the example for that change to occur. So, and usually, typically, we'll always hope that it will, I am a hopeful person. So I will always hope that with enough examples and modeling and showcasing that accessibility is important, it's fun, it's an incredible community. And if you're always showing up and working in that direction, I have found culture has followed. You will find people and people will find you. And that momentum will build. So you'll get a lot of people being like, it has to come from the top down, or well, maybe it's just the bottom up. It's both. It has to come from both directions. And so I think that both and pieces, it's both really important, but I'm also never I know it will find its way. And so I think it's also having a lot of tragic optimism, not, toxic positivity, but that tragic optimism to be like, this is really hard right now, and it's okay that it's really hard. And leaning into the spaces where you have the support, even if it's one person, because it's inevitable that that will grow. I don't know, the universe does have some sort of way of pushing certain things out and saying goodbye to the things that aren't deserving. And I have to believe that's true here because I've seen it happen time and time again. But I also think the energy of that comes from people having consistent tragic optimism and pushing forward despite it together.
I love that, Kelsey. And if I could add just two more words to that, I think a culture that is curious and a culture that is made up of leadership that is not afraid to show their own fallibility is a culture that can pave the way for everybody to be included, right? I think if we're curious about each other, we'll actually realize that most of your company probably does have a disability, right? Like, I think if we're honest about our own experiences, it gives space for other people to talk about their experience. And I think the more we can realize every organization is made up of humans, and those humans probably have disabilities or quirks or needs or all sorts of things that we can learn from each other to build better, then it's not this like idea, this thing that you're working toward. It's actually like, how do we support each other better? And I think that is a way stronger argument than how do I build an accessible product for someone who I don't know.
Yeah. Can I jump in on that for a second?
Oh, please do.
This is Alex. At Together, one of our like tenets or philosophies is that the disability community is like the one minority group that you can join at any point in your life. And so being accessible however you can be is like, but it behooves all of us. And for the I'm sorry, my brain just for your students, I think the best thing is looking through that lens, but in an ideal world, accessibility would be baked into their coursework, right? And like even if it's a 1 day seminar. And I think the more exposed we are to it, which I think is what Kelsey was saying, the more it just permeates into our lives. Like now I look at everything without even thinking about it. Like the lip on my driveway when my grandma came with a wheelchair. I was like, oh, I didn't think of that. It's gonna be a little bit of, and it's just because the ground settled funny. And then it percolates into the rest of your life. And like in my household, my husband is also ADD and autistic, and he's a school teacher, and he never thinks about anything accessibility because he's from the 80s, the early 80s, and he was like, oh, wait, what's that tool you use? Because I think one of my students could use it. They're severely ADHD and they don't have time blindness. And like, what's that clock? and then helped his kid learn something different and got a new tool. So, and then that's like the ripple effect of accessibility. But I think until it affects you personally, is really hard to think about. I mean, I didn't even get into it until 20, despite having disabilities. I mean, my mom never let us tell anybody we had dyslexia. She wanted us to just power through. And we did, and she tutored us. But I cut my hand open and couldn't use my left hand for 2 months. And that's how I ended up in accessibility because I was like, I have to type. That's my job. How am I going to type with one hand? What kind of do they make keyboards for one-handed people like with limb differences? And that was the start of my lens being opened. So, and then that, it's a ripple effect.
So, Alex, you sort of echo what I asked of Blake separately. I asked each of you to give us a quote, and one of the things that he shared with me is seek to understand. That's what you're talking about. It's getting your mom and others to understand the world you're in. And Blake, can you expand on that when you gave me that quote? You said, if you don't mind me paraphrasing what you have here, seek to understand. Everyone plays a role in accessibility. If you are curious, ask questions and want to know about lived experience of the people with disability. That's how you get into accessibility. It shows where you find your fit in the place you are at. Seeking to understand, build the foundational empathy of the work. Want to expand on that?
This is Blake. Totally. I think seeking to understand comes from going through my vision loss and feeling deeply misunderstood by just people, situations, and experiencing firsthand lack of accessibility and just isolation things can cause. And when learning new assistive technology, navigating things, like I want other people to know about it so I can feel known in that journey. So that what you shared comes deeply from a human experience, and I always want to bring accessibility back to the human experience. And I've heard so many other panelists echo just curiosity, asking questions, and I think seeking to understand sums a lot of that up to me. And a lot of the gaps and challenges we have are caused from misunderstanding. What I know I shared a bit before about how accessibility is everybody's role, and Kelsey has my gears turning on what that means and a lot of angles to it. But I think this sentiment I'm sharing is a huge step one, but you will continue to take steps the rest of your career, your life, in this journey. It's not like you take a couple steps and now you've arrived and you're in the club. We're all still seeking to understand from others' perspectives in this accessibility work.
So we are approaching 10 minutes to the end. My goodness, time flies by. I do know that we have some questions in the Q&A. So guys, I'm going to read it out loud, and please feel free to respond. There have been many negative impacts of modern technology, much as AI's environmental impact that was previously briefly mentioned. Do you have any comment on technology, how technology advancement affects people with marginalized intersecting identity? For example, a person who has a disability is low income and is a person of color. How can we hold people and companies accountable and make meaningful changes? That is reality. That's the market, the community that I was talking about earlier. That's the reality. Who would like to respond to that?
This is Alex. I can. My previous life before TGI was in compliance law. And so one of the things that will hold them accountable is policy and advocacy at the legal level. And, we just saw all these boycotts happen over the last 2 years with massive companies. And they had a direct impact on their bottom line. So things like that. Other than that, it is really difficult because they seem untouchable, but there are ways to do it just in your personal life, right? Like if this is something you don't believe in, then don't buy it, don't use it, and advocate for that perspective in your own community and see what happens.
Anyone else like to add, respond to that?
I don't know if I have a solution, but I think that you're hitting on something interesting, which is, some of the most impacted people for climate change and climate disasters are people with disabilities, right? I think I was at a conference recently and I was talking to folks who actually are building like tech for emergencies or like FEMA type technology. And, I went up to them and I said, how are you building for accessibility? Because we know that people with disabilities are some of the ones that are left behind in these situations. Like, how are you thinking about that? And some of them were, and some of them weren't, right? And so I think flagging things earlier is important. And I also think context is important. So part of the work we do is around indigenous and tribal lands. And so we are working with some of the tribal communities in the Southwest around understanding their context and understanding what it means to bring assistive technology to rural communities that don't have electricity, or communities that, you have a really rough terrain, or communities that lose electricity like periodically. And so I think our theories is like, how do you understand assistive technology in the margins and make it work there? And then how do you bring that kind of back into the center again? I don't have the solution, but I think the more we can look across community differences meaningfully and in a way that actually highlights difference and doesn't assume universal design means universal, I think we will have somewhat of a better path forward.
I know.
Thank you both.
Oh,
Kelsey, go ahead. Yes.
sorry. I know well, this is kind of piggybacking, this is Kelsey, off of Alex, and kind of thinking locally, because I think this also speaks to a little bit of what Blake was talking about with like feeling like things are so heavy or daunting. So the more you can kind of pour in your neighborhood and your community, I think is really critical right now. I know where I live in Massachusetts, every town or kind of certain region of Massachusetts has a commission on disability. And many of those commissions on disabilities, they exist in different forms throughout, the country in different states. It's a really great place to make very tangible impact in your own town, in your own, and you can really see and experience the impact of that. Every day. It's where you can connect with your city councilors, or it's where you can connect with local businesses by serving on a committee like that, or by showing up to provide public comment on and your perspective and what you know that you need or your neighbors need. And I think that can be really encouraging, as like if you're not sure where to start, maybe today you Google if you have a commission on disability in your town, or where the closest relevant kind of space is related to that, where you can show up and potentially serve or listen, and see what's needed. The next needed thing, I think, is what comes to mind. And I know that a lot of local communities, they may actually have some of the resources, or they just might be used incorrectly, or they might not be used fully. And so you might have a perspective that could be shared, because we know that technology, of course, will scale whatever we put into it. So we want to scale equity and not inequity. So those are some really tangible opportunities, I think.
Kelsey, I think that's a good segue to the question we have here that you'd like to respond to, and I'll read it for the group. As a CS educator and early stage researcher working in inclusive ed tech, I've noted that accessibility is often deprioritized due to perceived cost, scalability, or software performance concerns. How can we better articulate the long-term innovation and economic value of accessibility so it becomes a strategic advantage rather than a compliance checkbox? That's a great question. So common, but this is what we do. So please, love to get your take on that.
I have so many thoughts on this question, and I love this
I'm
question.
sure you do.
But right off the bat, I just feel like I have to say that you're already, if you're doing research, you're getting insights from disabled users, because disability obviously impacts at least 1 in 4 people in the US, but 1 in 6 people globally, at least. And I say at least because disability data is like a data desert, right? We don't have a lot of insights about disability because of so many things, cultural impacts, perceived beliefs about disability, et cetera. So it's very likely that the statistics are significantly higher. But what is really interesting to me is I'd be curious how you're setting up those studies, what insights you're collecting from the people that you're doing research with. Are you gathering any of that insight to determine? Because this is something that we've done previously in a different organization I worked at, was when we were struggling to get more specific accessibility research insights, disability research insights, we started adapting what we were already doing and found that about 25 to sometimes 30% of the people we were gaining insights from identified as having a disability. And just the fact that we left off key questions meant that we weren't discerning that information. So I would be looking at how can you capture that insight just by naturally existing in a space where humans are giving you information, and many of those humans will be disabled. And I think as part of that, the other side of this is I sometimes think that I think a lot of us know that accessibility is also just good design. It's a foundation of usability. Of course, you can make things that are accessible that are not usable. But generally speaking, I think how we talk about some of the insights we learn directly, we don't have to substantially separately say we have to do this for accessibility. We can say, hey, this is what we learned, and these are the patterns or approaches that we want to take because we know that it will be the most usable, the most inclusive, the most clean, the most clear. All of those things are facets of accessibility. And I think people hear accessibility and freak out. But the reality is there's so many descriptors of accessibility that are just good design, good practice, that I'd also recommend, if you're experiencing a lot of pushback in this way, taking those principles from the insights you learn and presenting confidently the insights you have in a way that doesn't allow them to choose something that's inaccessible, if that makes sense.
I think that's really right. One last thing, I know we have to end. Where is the money, right? In disability and education technology, Section 504 at least used to have money. There used to be funds for that, right? If you can make the case that you can unlock more money for that product, then it's a very clear use case, in addition to all the goodness and the things that Kelsey just shared.
So we are approaching 12:30. Great chat, but I'd love to get one word from each of you about accessibility. One word. Blake.
Just one word?
Clock is ticking.
Sorry. I would say accessibility needs more young leaders. So students is a great time and opportunity to get involved in accessibility.
All right, so that's one phrase. Molly, one word.
Okay, I didn't know.
Fun.
Alex, you're on mute.
Needed.
Kelsey?
Everything.
There you have it, folks. Guys, thank you so much for this engaging conversation. And to the team at Teach Access, thank you for putting this together. Have an awesome day today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.